The air in the car clung to me, a stale shroud of recycled breath and unspoken anxieties. My knuckles were white where I gripped the steering wheel, the worn leather slick with a sheen of sweat I couldn't seem to wipe away. Blackwood Manor. The name itself tasted like dust and decay on my tongue. I hadn't been back to this place since Leela. The drive had been long, a blur of highway and increasingly desolate landscapes. Each mile chipped away at the fragile composure I'd spent years meticulously constructing. Now, staring at the wrought-iron gates, twisted like skeletal fingers, I felt the familiar tremor begin in my chest, a tiny bird trapped in a cage of bone. They creaked open at my approach, a mournful sigh swallowed by the wind that whipped through the overgrown drive. The house loomed, a hulking silhouette against the bruised twilight sky. It was worse than I remembered, if that were even possible. Paint peeled like sunburnt skin, revealing the gray, weathered wood beneath. Shutters hung askew like broken limbs. A single, unblinking eye of a window on the third floor seemed to stare directly at me. It was a monument to neglect, a testament to a life I tried so hard to outrun. My grandmother. I hadn't seen her in 20 years, not since the incident. She'd always been a distant figure, a ghost in my periphery, a presence marked by the scent of lavender and the rustle of her silk dresses. Her lawyer's letter had been curt, a formal announcement of her passing and my unexpected inheritance, and everything within it, everything. The front door groaned open, a deep, guttural sound that echoed through the cavernous entryway. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light that pierced the gloom. The air inside was heavy, thick with the smell of old paper, damp earth, and something else. Something cloying and faintly sweet, like overripe fruit. My footsteps crunched on fallen plaster. Every shadow seemed to stretch and writhe, playing tricks on my eyes. I felt a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, the distinct impression of being watched. I moved through the house like a trespasser, my gaze sweeping over shrouded furniture and forgotten relics. Each room was a tableau of a life frozen in time, a museum of my grandmother's quiet eccentricity. It was the kitchen before breakfast. Knives accounted for mostly, that drew me in. The name felt absurdly specific, a coded message I couldn't decipher. The room was surprisingly clean, or at least less choked with dust than the rest of the manor. A heavy oak table dominated the center, set with a single chipped porcelain plate and a tarnished silver fork. Sunlight, weak and watery, slanted through the grimy panes of the window, illuminating the worn linoleum floor. It was the knives that caught my attention. They hung from a magnetic strip above the butcher block, a gleaming, menacing row. I counted them, my breath catching in my throat. 6. There should be 7. My mind flashed back to a small porcelain hand. Leela. Her painted eyes, wide and unnerving, seemed to follow me even now, across the chasm of years. The memory was a sharp, jagged shard, piercing the carefully constructed defenses I'd built around my sanity. I could almost feel the cool, smooth curve of her cheek against my own, the faint, unsettling chill that emanated from her tiny form. I forced myself to focus. It was just a house, just old memories. The missing knife was a coincidence, a simple oversight. I ran a hand over the rough wood of the counter, the grain familiar and yet alien. A floorboard creaked upstairs. I froze, my senses on high alert. It was an old house, settling. That's all, just the house. But the sound was too deliberate, too close. It wasn't the groan of timber, it was the soft, measured tread of a footstep. Was I truly alone in this place? The gravel crunched under my tires, a grating sound that felt too loud in the suffocating silence. Blackwood Manor loomed, a skeletal silhouette against the bruised twilight sky. It wasn't just old, it was tired. Every gabled roof, every peeling shutter, sagged with a weary resignation. I killed the engine, and the silence rushed in, thick and heavy like unbreathable air. My hands trembled as I reached for the door handle, the cold metal a shark against my clammy skin. This was it, the place I'd tried so hard to forget. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of light, piercing the gloom from a grimy transom window. It smelled of mildew, old wood, and something else. Something faint and cloying, like wilting flowers left too long in a closed room. I paused, straining to hear anything over the frantic thrumming in my own chest. Nothing. Just the house breathing, settling, waiting. I found myself drawn to the back of the house, a vague memory of a kitchen leading me through dimly lit hallways. Portraits of stern-faced ancestors with eyes that seemed to follow me lined the walls. Their gazes were accusatory, judging my intrusion. I kept my eyes forward, a knot tightening in my stomach. Finally, I pushed open a heavy oak door. The kitchen before breakfast, knives accounted for mostly. Sign, faded and askew, hung above the entrance. The room was vast, a relic of a time when meals were prepared on a grand scale. A massive cast-iron stove dominated one wall, its black surface dull with disuse. A long, scarred wooden table occupied the center of the room, surrounded by mismatched chairs. Sunlight, weak and diffused, filtered through the grime-streaked windows, illuminating the pervasive layer of dust. My eyes scanned the room, cataloging the disarray. Cobwebs draped the hanging pots and pans like macabre decorations. On the counter, a chipped ceramic jug sat beside a tarnished silver sugar bowl. Everything was coated in a fine gray film. My gaze drifted to the butcher block island, and then I saw them. A row of knives, their handles worn smooth, gleamed dully. They were old, heavy, the kind that could sever bone with a single stroke. Six large, sharp knives, the sign said mostly. What did that mean? My fingers twitched, an involuntary urge to reach out, to feel the weight of one, to test its edge. I resisted, forcing my hands into my pockets. A sense of unease, a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, told me I wasn't alone. I moved towards the pantry, its door slightly ajar. The air inside was even staler, thick with the scent of dried herbs and something vaguely metallic. Shelves lined the walls, holding rows of empty jars, their labels long since faded into illegibility. In the back corner, tucked away behind a stack of empty sacks, I saw it. A small wooden rocking horse, its paint chipped, one eye missing, its painted smile a grotesque leer. It was a child's toy. My childhood flashed before my eyes, a jumble of fragmented images, fleeting and indistinct. A small hand reaching out, a high-pitched giggle. I backed away from the pantry, my heart racing. This place held too many ghosts, too many memories I'd buried deep. I turned back to the kitchen, my eyes drawn once more to the knives. Were they always there? Had my grandmother kept them like that, or was it something else? Something that had been waiting patiently for my return. The air grew heavy, charged with an unseen presence. What was this house trying to tell me? The air inside Blackwood Manor was thick, a cloying mix of dust and something else. Something sharp, like forgotten spices left to rot. My footsteps echoed on the warped hardwood floors, each creak a protest against my intrusion. Sunlight, what little dared to penetrate the grimy windows, fell in dusty shafts, illuminating the decay. Cobwebs draped the furniture like tattered shrouds, and the scent of mildew was a constant, suffocating presence. I'd been staying in the master bedroom, a cavernous space that felt more like a mausoleum than a place to sleep. But the stillness of the house was starting to fray my nerves. I needed a distraction, a task, anything to anchor myself to something real. My grandmother's belongings were still scattered, a testament to her sudden departure from life. I'd been avoiding this part, letting the inertia of the house keep me from delving too deep. But the gnawing unease, the feeling of being watched that had settled over me since my arrival, was becoming unbearable. I decided to start with the kitchen. It felt like a sensible place, a room meant for sustenance, for routine. Perhaps there, amidst the mundane, I could find some semblance of control. The kitchen before breakfast, knives accounted for mostly, was exactly as I'd imagined. A grand but neglected room. A massive cast-iron stove dominated one wall, its enamel chipped and stained. A heavy wooden table, scarred with decades of use, stood in the center, surrounded by mismatched chairs. The wallpaper, faded floral pattern, peeled in damp strips near the sink, and the knives. They were in a butcher block, nestled together like sleeping vipers. I ran my finger along the cool steel of one, a long, thin carving knife. It felt solid, real. A wave of nausea washed over me, a phantom sensation of something cold and sharp against my skin. I pulled my hand back, my breath catching in my throat. My grandmother, a woman I barely knew, had been a collector, not of art like me, but of curiosities, Trinkets, forgotten heirlooms, things others would have tossed. Her attic, I'd been told by the lawyer, was a labyrinth of her accumulated past, but I suspected her hoarding extended beyond the attic. I started opening cabinets, drawers. Old tins of biscuits, long past their expiration, brittle and smelling of stale grease. A set of chipped porcelain cups, each with a tiny, painted bird. And then, in a drawer beneath the sink, tucked behind a stack of yellowed tea towels, I found it. It was a small wooden chest, dark and unvarnished, with a tarnished brass clasp. My fingers trembled as I reached for it. The wood felt rough, splintery, and a faint, almost imperceptible warmth seemed to emanate from it. I hesitated. Every instinct screamed at me to leave it shut, to pretend I hadn't seen it. But a morbid curiosity, a twisted sense of obligation, pushed me forward. The clasp was stiff, protesting with a groan of old metal. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was Leela. He was smaller than I remembered, but no less terrifying. Her porcelain face, once painted with rosy cheeks and innocent blue eyes, was now cracked and discolored. Her painted smile seemed to stretch into a rictus of malice. Her dress, a once pristine lace confection, was now yellowed and torn, its delicate fabric brittle with age. The scent that rose from the chest was not of dust, but of something far more disturbing. A faint, sickly, sweet perfume like decaying flowers. The kitchen, moments before a sanctuary of the mundane, warped around me. I could hear it then, a faint, rustling sound, like dry leaves skittering across pavement. It was the sound of her dress. But he was still, utterly still, in the chest. My hands shook so violently I could barely close the lid. The memory, a fractured shard of terror, slammed into me. A small, feverish hand reaching out, a whisper in the dark, the unnerving stillness of her painted gaze. I saw it, not with my eyes, but with a visceral certainty, the tiny, chipped fingernails, the way her head lolled at an unnatural angle. The air grew heavy, pressing in on me, making it hard to breathe. There was that a child's giggle, faint and distorted, echoing from the empty hallway. Or was it just the house settling, the wind playing tricks? I stumbled back, my heel catching on the leg of the table. The chest slipped from my grasp, hitting the floor with a dull thud. It didn't spring open, but the feeling of her presence, of her being there, was undeniable. It clung to me, a suffocating shroud. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. There was this a trick of my mind, a phantom echo of a childhood trauma? Or had Leela truly been waiting for me all these years, in the heart of this decaying house? The scent of rotten flowers intensified, and I could have sworn I saw movement in the periphery of my vision, a flicker of something small and white darting behind the cast-iron stove. The kitchen before breakfast, knives accounted for mostly, was a monument to neglect. A thick film coated every surface, dulling the gleam of the once proud cast-iron range. My breath plumed in the chill air, a stark contrast to the oppressive humidity that seemed to cling to the very walls. It smelled of damp plaster and something else, something faintly metallic, like old pennies left in a forgotten drawer. I ran a finger along the butcher block counter, leaving a clean streak through the grime. It was a small victory, a defiance against the pervasive decay. My task this morning, a self-imposed one, was to catalogue the kitchen's contents. A foolish endeavor, perhaps, but the lingering unease from the previous night demanded action. I needed order, a tangible sense of control. I opened the drawers, the wood groaning in protest. Silverware, tarnished and bent, lay scattered like fallen soldiers. Then the knives. The butcher block, heavy and scarred, held its collection of blades. I counted them, my fingers tracing the cool steel. 7, there should be 8. A bread knife, long and serrated, was missing. My stomach tightened. I'd seen it yesterday, I was sure of it. I checked the knife block again, pulling out each one, feeling the weight, the sharpness. No, only 7. A low hum started, barely perceptible at first, like the distant thrum of a forgotten generator. It vibrated through the floorboards, up my legs, a disquieting tremor that seemed to originate from the very bones of the house. I paused, listening. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the house settling. It was a sound, a deep, resonant vibration that made the hairs on my arms prickle. I walked to the window, wiping away a patch of condensation. The grounds outside were shrouded in a thick, pearlescent fog, muffling the world. The ancient oak at the edge of the property, its branches like skeletal fingers, seemed to writhe in the mist. Then a whisper, so faint I almost dismissed it as a trick of the wind whistling through a cracked pane. But it was too distinct, too intimate. It sounded like my name, drawn out, a silken thread of sound that snaked through the quiet. Dean. My hand instinctively went to the largest chef's knife still in its block. Its handle felt solid, reassuringly real. Nothing. The metallic tang in the air seemed to intensify, sharp and coppery. I tried to rationalize. The house was old. Old houses made noises. The fog was disorienting. My mind, perhaps, was playing tricks, dredging up old fears. I was an artist, prone to flights of fancy, wasn't I? That's what I told myself. But the hum persisted, a tangible presence now, pressing in on me. It came again, closer this time, right behind my ear. You can't hide. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I stumbled backward, my heel catching on a loose floorboard. I righted myself, my gaze sweeping the room frantically. It pulsed as if breathing. I took a step towards it, my breath catching in my throat. The hum intensified, a physical pressure against my eardrums. I could smell it now, a faint, sweet perfume, like decaying roses. And with the scent came a flicker of movement in the periphery of my vision. I blinked, and it was gone. The hum subsided, receding into the background noise of the house, and the scent of decay, sweet and cloying, lingered. I looked down at my hands. They were shaking. My mind was a battlefield, logic warring with the primal, guttural fear that clawed at my throat. There was the bread knife gone because I'd misplaced it, or because something else had taken it. Was it just a trick of the light, or had something truly been there, watching me? The floorboards groaned a mournful protest beneath my weight. Each step was a negotiation with the house, a house that felt less like an inheritance and more like a tomb. The lingering scent of dust and decay clung to me, a second skin. I'd spent the night in the spare room, the one with the peeling floral wallpaper that seemed to watch me with faded, accusing eyes. Sleep had been a battlefield, a fractured landscape of whispers and fleeting shadows. Now, the kitchen before breakfast, knives accounted for mostly, beckoned. It was a phrase I'd scribbled in my sketchbook weeks ago, a nervous tick, a desperate attempt to impose order on the encroaching chaos. The room itself was a testament to neglect. Grime coated the surfaces, a greasy film that dulled the once gleaming chrome of the old appliances. The air was thick with the stale breath of forgotten meals, a cloying sweetness that turned my stomach. I needed coffee, desperately. My hands trembled as I fumbled with the ancient percolator. The clink of metal against metal was unnervingly loud. I avoided looking at the knife block. It was a dark, silent row of potential. I had to paint. The urge was a physical ache, a gnawing hunger. My studio, a converted attic space, was my sanctuary, my only refuge. But lately, the canvases had begun to feel like extensions of Leela's influence. The colors I chose, the shapes I rendered, they were no longer entirely my own. I remember the first one, a self-portrait, or what was meant to be. My own features were there, yes, but warped, stretched thin as if by an unseen hand. A single crimson tear, impassably bright against the muted palette, streaked down my cheek. It wasn't just a painting, it was a confession. Now, the new pieces were worse. The air in the paintings felt heavy, suffocating. I could almost smell the mildew, feel the grit under my fingernails. One canvas in particular held me captive. It was a close-up of the doll's trunk, the one my grandmother had warned me never to open. I hadn't seen it in years, but it was as vivid in my mind as if it were here, in this grimy kitchen, marking me. The latch began to twist, to elongate, forming a gaping maw. And from within the painted trunk, a faint, phosphorescent glow began to emanate, an unholy light that seemed to pulse with a malevolent life of its own. My brushstrokes became frantic, desperate. I was trying to contain it, to force the image back into the realm of pigment and oil, but it was fighting me. The paint seemed to resist my will, to slither and writhe under the bristles. My breath hitched. My knuckles were white, my fingers rigid around the brush. I stepped back, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. The doll's trunk on the canvas pulsed with that sickly luminescence. It was no longer just paint. It was a window into what? I could feel the hairs on my arms rise. My gaze was drawn to the window, to the weak morning light struggling to penetrate the grime. It offered no warmth, no solace. It only served to highlight the decay. I felt a tremor run through the floorboards, a low vibration that seemed to emanate from the very foundations of the house. It wasn't the wind. It was something else, something deep and ancient and hungry. My eyes flickered back to the canvas. A faint, almost inaudible sound, like the rustling of dry leaves, seemed to emanate from the painting itself. Was it the house settling, or was it something stirring within the depths of that painted wood, waiting for me to look away? The air in the kitchen before breakfast, knives accounted for mostly, was thick, stagnant, a cloying perfume of old grease and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet. I'd woken with that taste in my mouth, a phantom copper tang that no amount of brushing had dislodged. The morning light, what little of it penetrated the grime-streaked windows, did little to dispel the gloom. It painted weak, dusty stripes across the scarred linoleum. I needed to find her. Not her, not yet, but the truth about Leela. My grandmother had always been a creature of shadows, her life a series of hushed secrets and averted gazes. But that doll had been the epicenter of her silence. The kitchen felt like a forgotten corner of the house, a place where meals had been prepared and forgotten, leaving behind echoes of their preparation. The sink was a stained porcelain moor, the taps weeping rust. I ran my fingers along the edge of the counter, the chipped formica rough beneath my skin. The drawers were still. Utensils, tarnished and mismatched, lay jumbled together. Spoons, forks, a potato masher, and the knives. My breath hitched. They were all there, or nearly all. The heavy butcher knife, its blade dulled with age. The serrated bread knife, teeth like a tiny menacing saw. The paring knife, small and sharp. I counted them again, my heart a dull, insistent thud against my ribs. 1, 2, 3, 7 knives. I remembered there being 8, a specific one. The one with the ivory handle. Where was it? A tremor ran through my hand as I closed the drawer, the metallic click echoing in the stillness. It was always locked. My grandmother had kept it that way, her keys jingling with a nervous haste whenever I'd asked. Now the old brass lock looked rusted, the wood around it warped. A part of me screamed to leave it shut, to let whatever secrets festered within remain undisturbed. But another part, the part that had been haunted for decades, the part that felt Leela's unseen gaze, urged me forward. I found a rusted crowbar in the shed, its handle slick with damp earth. The hinges of the pantry door groaned in protest, a sound like a dying animal as I forced it open. The smell that rushed out was overwhelming, a potent cocktail of dried herbs, mouse droppings, and that same faint, metallic sweetness that permeated the kitchen. Shelves lined the walls, laden with dusty jars of preserves, their contents long since turned to unidentifiable sludge. Cobwebs thick as carton batting draped over everything. My eyes scanned the shelves, searching, not for food but for something else, something hidden, a wooden box. It felt unnervingly warm to the touch, a strange residual heat that had no business being there. The lid wasn't locked. It lifted with a soft sigh, revealing a nest of faded velvet. Nestled within was a single, yellowed photograph. It showed my grandmother, younger, her face unlined, a strange, almost feverish light in her eyes. He was holding a doll, Leela. But this wasn't the Leela I remembered. This doll was different. Its porcelain face was pristine, its painted eyes wide and innocent. It was dressed in a delicate lace gown, pristine white. Beside the photograph lay a small, leather-bound journal. I picked it up. The leather was supple, almost alive. The pages were filled with my grandmother's spidery script, a stark contrast to the shaky scrawl I remembered from her later years. I flipped through, my heart racing a frantic rhythm against my ribs. It detailed her childhood, her loneliness, her fascination with an antique shop she discovered on the outskirts of town. She wrote about finding Leela there, about feeling an immediate, overwhelming connection. Then the tone shifted. The entries became more frantic, more desperate, about how Leela had shown her things, terrible things, in the reflection of mirrors, about how Leela had promised her, what? Power, companionship. The words blurred, her handwriting devolving into a chaotic scrawl, and then I saw it. A passage dated the year I turned 7. The year of the incident. My grandmother wrote about a ritual, a sacrifice. Not of blood, not of flesh, but of something more profound. She wrote about binding Leela's essence to the house to ensure its protection, its continued influence. She wrote about needing a vessel, a conduit. She wrote about me. My hands shook so violently I almost dropped the journal. The metallic scent in the air suddenly seemed to intensify, thick and suffocating. I remembered the summer fair, the bright lights, the dizzying rides, and then the feeling of being utterly, terrifyingly alone. I remembered Leela's porcelain face, no longer innocent, but contorted in a silent scream. My grandmother hadn't just owned Leela, he had made her. And then he had used me to anchor it, to bind it to this place, to this reality. But what had she sacrificed? What had she given up? And what had she done to Leela to make her? This. The journal slipped from my nerveless fingers, hitting the dusty floor with a soft thud. I stared at the wooden box, at the photograph of my grandmother and the innocent doll. Leela was here, and she remembered. Had she always been waiting for me to come back? The metallic tang was stronger now, a coppery whisper that clung to the back of my throat. I ran my tongue over my teeth. Nothing. Just the lingering phantom taste that had plagued me since I'd woken. Sunlight, thin and watery, bled through the grimy panes of the kitchen before breakfast. Knives accounted for mostly. It did little to dispel the oppressive stillness that had settled over the house like a shroud. I needed to leave. The thought hammered at my temples, a dull, insistent rhythm. This place, this house, it was a mausoleum of my childhood nightmares, and Leela was its resident ghoul. I'd spent the night in the guest room, a room I'd carefully avoided before, the one with the faded floral wallpaper peeling like sunburnt skin. Breakfast felt like a performance I was forced to endure. I moved through the motions, opening tins of beans, stirring them in a chipped enamel part on the ancient gas stove. The gas hissed, a low, hungry sound. One was missing. My hands trembled as I poured the beans into a bowl. The metallic scent seemed to emanate from the very air, weaving itself into the mundane aroma of baked beans. It was the smell of blood. My childhood memories, sharp and jagged, began to surface. I had to get out. I would pack a bag, walk out the front door, and never look back. I wouldn't let her have me again, not this time. I finished the beans quickly, barely tasting them. I pushed my chair back, the scraping sound unnaturally loud. Time to go. I walked towards the hall, my footsteps unnervingly silent on the worn linoleum. The grandfather clock stood sentinel, its pendulum swinging with a slow, deliberate rhythm. As I reached for the heavy oak front door, my hand froze. I pulled. It wouldn't budge. I rattled the knob harder, my breath catching in my throat. It was locked, bolted, from the inside. But I hadn't locked it. I was sure of it. A low giggle, like dry leaves skittering across a stone floor, echoed from the depths of the house. It was thin, reedy, and impossibly close. My head snapped up. The giggle came again, closer this time, followed by a soft, childish humming. It was the tune she used to hum, the one that always accompanied her games. Games that always ended in tears. I turned back to the door, desperation clawing at me. I threw my weight against it, a futile gesture. It remained stubbornly sealed. I looked around, my eyes darting. The windows, I could break a window. I moved towards the nearest one, a tall, arched pane overlooking the overgrown garden. The glass was thick, old. I needed something heavy. My gaze fell on a cast-iron umbrella stand by the door. It was heavy, ornate. I grabbed it, my grip tight. As I raised the umbrella stand, the humming stopped. The air grew heavy, thick with an unseen presence. I could feel eyes on me, 1,000 tiny pinpricks of awareness. I swung. The umbrella stand met the glass with a dull thud, not the shattering crack I expected. The glass rippled like water disturbed, then reformed, as if I had struck a solid wall. I stared, dumbfounded. My hands shook violently. It was too tall, too thin to be human. It was Leela's voice, but deeper, older, laced with something ancient and hungry. Not yet. I stumbled back, the umbrella stand clattering to the floor. Where had the metallic smell come from? And what was that thing coalescing in the hallway? The kitchen before breakfast, knives accounted for mostly, was a place of quiet dread. The morning light, usually a balm, felt thin, anemic, seeping through the grimy window panes like water through a sieve. Dust motes danced in its weak beams, tiny specters in the oppressive stillness. I could still feel the phantom weight of the umbrella stand, the phantom echo of its fall. My breath hitched. A faint scent, sickly sweet and cloying, hung in the air. It was the smell of old flowers, long dead, their perfume preserved in some grotesque amber. It was the smell of Leela. It always was whenever he was close. My hands trembled as I reached for the kettle. I poured it into a mug, the steam rising in a thin plume, a fragile offering to the encroaching unease. I remembered the words of the old woman, my grandmother's friend. He feeds on your fear, Dean, on your memories. The more you give her, the stronger she becomes. I had dismissed it as the ramblings of a grief-stricken elder, but now I wasn't so sure. The house, Leela, they were all a part of the same twisted tapestry. My eyes scanned the countertops, the worn butcher block, the chipped ceramic sink, the knives. I'd checked them last night, a desperate, futile act of control. Most were there, nestled in their wooden block. But one was missing, the carving knife, the one with the bone handle. It wasn't just the doll anymore, it was a tangible threat. He was making her presence known, her intentions clearer with every passing moment. I walked over to the pantry, my footsteps unnervingly loud on the linoleum. The door creaked open, revealing rows of dusty jars, faded labels, the scent of dried herbs and forgotten spices. Nothing, just emptiness. It was as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting. My gaze drifted to the floor, to the faint scuff marks near the back door. They were new. Someone or something had been here. A tremor ran through my body, a visceral reaction I couldn't suppress. My muscles tensed, ready to flee, but my feet remained rooted to the spot. Where could I go? I closed my eyes, forcing myself to breathe, deep, slow breaths. I pictured the attic, the dusty trunk, the faded photographs. My mother's face, young and vibrant. My father's smile, a rare, genuine thing. The memories were mine. They were not hers to twist, not hers to corrupt. When I opened my eyes, the light seemed to have shifted. It was no longer weak and anemic, but sharper, more defined. I could see the details now, the faint water stains on the ceiling, the intricate pattern of the faded wallpaper, the subtle imperfections in the wood of the table. And then I saw it, a glint of metal tucked beneath the heavy oak table. It lay there, innocent, unassuming. But I knew better. It was a lure, a trap. My heart still thrummed, but it was a steady beat now, a drum of defiance. I walked towards the table, my eyes fixed on the knife. I didn't reach for it. Instead, I knelt down, my knees creaking in protest. My fingers brushed against the cool, smooth surface of the wood. The sickly sweet scent intensified, cloying, suffocating. A faint rustling sound, like dry leaves skittering across a floor, emanated from the corner by the old icebox. My eyes snapped to the sound, but I felt it. A shift in the atmosphere, a prickling on my skin. He was here, watching, waiting. I didn't pick it up. I didn't run, I just waited. The silence stretched, taut and brittle. The only sound was my own ragged breathing. I didn't flinch. I didn't cower. I met the unseen gaze, my own eyes scanning the empty space, daring it to reveal itself. But I held firm. The memories, the photographs, my mother's smile, they were my shield. Slowly, deliberately, I pushed myself to my feet. The knife remained beneath the table. I didn't need it. I had something far more potent, my own will. My pace was steady, unhurried. Each step was a victory. The house groaned again, a sound of protest, of frustration, but it was not the sound of triumph. I looked back into the kitchen before breakfast, knives accounted for mostly. The weak morning light still struggled to penetrate the gloom, but they felt different now, less powerful, less absolute. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope. What would she do next? The air in the kitchen before breakfast, knives accounted for mostly, felt thinner. The weak morning light, a pale imitation of true dawn, did little to warm the chill that had settled deep in my bones. It was a different kind of cold than the icy grip Leela had once held over me. I'd done it. I'd faced her, faced the echo of her, and I'd survived. My breath hitched. Survived. I ran a trembling hand over the worn oak of the counter, the familiar grain a small anchor in the swirling chaos of my thoughts. The knives were there, lined up with an unsettling neatness. Just steel, inert and mundane. My gaze drifted to the window. Outside, the trees stood like skeletal sentinels against a bruised sky. They hadn't changed. They couldn't. They were just trees. But I saw them differently now. Had I truly won? Or had I merely pushed the battleground elsewhere? I remembered the final confrontation, the way the air had thickened, charged with a palpable malevolence. It wasn't Leela, not the doll I remembered from my childhood, but something far older, far more insidious, that had been wearing her skin. The porcelain had cracked, revealing not emptiness, but a churning, suffocating despair that had threatened to swallow me whole. I had felt it seep into me, a suffocating tide of regret and loneliness. My own buried grief, my own unspoken fears had been her weapon. I had screamed then, a raw, guttural sound that tore itself from my throat. It was a scream of defiance, a refusal to be consumed. I had poured every ounce of my will, every fractured memory of love and loss into that sound, and the house had shuddered, not with a physical tremor, but a profound, internal groan, as if the very foundations of reality had buckled under the strain, a stillness that felt like a held breath. I looked at my hands. They were steady now, the tremor gone, but they felt alien, disconnected. The artist's hands that had once coaxed beauty from clay and canvas were now stained with something I couldn't wash away. The scent of brewing coffee, a comforting aroma I'd always associated with normalcy, now carried a faint undertone of decay. There was the lingering residue of her influence. Or was it simply the smell of this old house, a place steeped in so much sorrow? I walked to the pantry, my footsteps unnervingly loud on the linoleum. I needed something to eat, something to ground me. My fingers brushed against a jar of preserved peaches, a relic from my grandmother's time. I remembered her hands gnarled and kind, her eyes holding a sorrow I had never understood until now. Had she known, I pulled out a loaf of bread, its crust still yielding. My stomach churned, a knot of apprehension tightening with each passing moment. I felt exposed, raw. The protective layers I had built over years of conscious effort had been stripped away, leaving me vulnerable. The truth, when it finally came, wasn't a grand revelation. It was a quiet, devastating understanding. Leela wasn't just a doll, he was a vessel. My grandmother, my father, and finally me, we had all been touched by the same sorrow, drawn into its orbit. I opened the bread, the tearing sound a small violence in the quiet kitchen. I needed to eat. I needed to keep going. But the path forward felt shrouded in mist. I had faced the ghost of my childhood, the tangible manifestation of my deepest fears, and I had emerged, seemingly whole. I took a bite of bread. It tasted like dust. I looked at the window again. The sun was beginning to climb, casting long, pale shafts of light through the grimy panes. They were merely waiting. It had simply changed form.